Welcome to 11 Investigates Case Files. I am lead investigator Brian Duggar. My investigative partner Melissa Andrews is on assignment, but she should be back with us next week. I am, however, joined by Luis Castilla and Lorenzo Vasquez. Now, January 3rd was a big day for these guys. On that day, Judge Joseph McNamara dismissed all charges against them related to a 1992 murder. Why? Because the judge previously ruled that key evidence was not turned over to defense teams. Evidence that pointed to other suspects, and evidence that was not only not turned over to the defense, it also wasn't turned over to prosecutors. So take a look at the story we ran about this case on January 3rd. Outside the courtroom, there was happiness.
It's an amazing day for these four individuals, and then also for Eric to get the justice that they finally deserve.
Anger.
Live in an 8x12 box and then have the world thrown at you.
And bitterness.
Certain people need to start doing their jobs right. Simple as that. You know, they knew back then. They knew we was innocent. Just like they know now. They know. But nobody wanted to ask the right questions, so they put a story out there and it stuck for 32 years.
But mostly relief. Relief the long legal journey is over for 5 men exonerated of murder. So what's your plan from today forward?
To live every day like tomorrow's not promised.
What's your plan for today? How are you going to celebrate?
I'm gonna wait for my brother to get out, and we're gonna go to Texas Roadhouse. he wanted Applebee's, but I said no. Nothing against Applebee's, but Texas Roadhouse is better.
Lorenzo's brother Mel is the only of the 5 who was still in prison. He and Lorenzo took Alford pleas after seeing their 3 friends convicted at trial.
They were teenagers at the time, Mel and Larry. You know, they saw what happened to their 3 friends. The same evidence that would have been presented against them was presented against those 3 friends in jury trials. And the juries found them guilty and they received horrific sentences. So when you're that age, what do you do?
The evidence their attorneys did not have at trial was first uncovered by the Wrongful Conviction Project in 2018. Multiple Crime Stopper tips pointed to other suspects. The family of Huggins' girlfriend confronted the man on the night of his murder. One of the men was carrying a heavy wooden table leg.
I think our system needs to put guardrails in place to make sure things like this don't happen. The evidence that showed the innocence of these 5 guys was sitting in the police department for 30 years, just sitting there hidden. And it should have been disclosed to them before their trials, before they took pleas, and it wasn't.
Another tipster told police Huggins was killed because he was with Lee Jeffries the night the man killed him at Oldbury. Ironically, that killing could have been Lorenzo Vasquez's alibi.
I remember the night that Vernon Huggins was killed, because the same night a girl that my mom grew up with named Emma Dawberry, she was killed the same night, and I was sitting at my dad's house when they found her body, and my mom was like, I know that girl, I went to school with her.
Vasquez was paroled in 2015. He was convicted as a young teen and struggled to rebuild after losing decades of his freedom.
I was able to start over and get a job, and luckily I wasn't faced with a lot of the, roadblocks that a lot of people coming home, especially after serving so much time, face, and also because, a lot of people don't want to hire you. I've been denied so many jobs, Amazon, UPS, FedEx.
Today is the first day his brother will have a chance to start a new life.
Just talking to my client, just looking him in the eye and listening to him talk about this and how painful this has all been. How he was, 16, hoping maybe to go to Ohio State and be a runner, and his life's taken away from him. It's just very, very sad. And here he is today at almost 49, finally getting to walk out of the system and hopefully have a great life.
Louis, so how many years did you actually spend in prison?
It was close to 28.
And Lorenzo, how many years did you spend in prison?
I spent 22 years, 3 months, and 12 days.
And did you have anything to do with the murder of Vernon Huggins?
Absolutely not.
Did you have anything to do with it?
Absolutely not.
So how does this make you feel? I mean, so you guys spent all this time in prison, then you ended up getting paroled. And just to be honest with you, the prosecutors, after I ran the story on you guys previously, they got upset at me because, I said, these 5 guys were exonerated for this murder. And they're like, they weren't exonerated. We just had to dismiss the charges because there was no longer, the lead detective, as you know, is dead. The other detectives didn't remember it. Witnesses weren't cooperating anymore. So they said they didn't dismiss it because they believe you're innocent, but because they can no longer try the case. So how does that make you feel? Because these charges were dismissed with prejudice. I mean, they could bring them up against you again. So how does that make you feel that this is still kind of hanging over your head?
I mean, as far as I go, I'm angry. The evidence that they found and the things that they know now, there's no reason for this woman to be having a black cloud over her head. None whatsoever. The evidence is there. They know we didn't do this. Okay? Their detectives made the conscious decision to do what they did all them years ago. Okay? They're the ones that hid that stuff. She knows they never would have convicted us. All that back in '93 if they had that evidence. But because of them 2 cops doing what they did, I don't want it. I mean, if you're going to hang the cloud over my head, then just come on, let's go with it. All right? Let's get the trial going, whatever. So.
Lorenzo, I mean, what's your thought?
I'm angry. I try not to hold on to it because it'll eat you alive, but I feel the same way. The evidence was overwhelmingly pointed towards other suspects, and had the evidence not been hidden from us, we would have never got convicted. They would have been convicting other people of this crime. And I don't think it's fair to not only us, but to the victim's family, to Vernon Huggins' family, that the people who really killed him are still out there and they're not being charged. And the prosecution's never going to admit. It's rare that they admit to anybody being innocent. They're going to let you out. We're already all out, so they're like, we don't have to admit, we don't have to look bad, basically. I mean, if you look at some of the most notorious cases of wrongful conviction in the history of the United States, many of them, the prosecution never admits that they're actually innocent.
Yeah.
There's always another suspect, or there was another suspect that they still had something to do with it, or it's just it's a way of not making themselves look bad.
Yeah.
And I challenge them to retry me, and whatever happens, happens. I've spent over half my life in prison already, and I don't believe any evidence that you have will convict me, so retry me.
And that is the thing about this case. I mean, you guys were so young, actually, when you went to trial, and you spent more, like you said, you spent more than half your life in prison. But let's talk about the case a little bit. So there was this narrative that the prosecutors and the police put together. Eric Misch runs into Vernon Huggins at Wilson Park. And the idea is that he's going to distract them, and you guys and 2 other guys are then going to jump them. And the narrative was that you guys used to, jump or jack black guys because, I guess, because they believed that you guys were racist.
Right.
And so that's the narrative they painted about you. And I know we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, Louis, and you got pretty upset about that because I said, well, this is what, the testimony was. So tell me what's wrong with that story.
I mean, my thing is this. again, if them cops would have did their homework and went to the north side of Toledo where I grew up and asked people that knew me, if they would have looked at my family, who my best friend was back then, they couldn't have put all this white supremacist stuff on me.
Like your best friend was actually a black guy, right?
Yeah, yeah. You know, he knows who he is, so I ain't gonna mention his name.
Sure.
But, you know, but I got cousins, uncles, aunts. You know, that's why that whole, them putting that stigma on me was what hurt me the worst, okay? Knowing where I come from, okay? The north side of Toledo, not too many racists over there, okay? Whites, blacks, browns, we all grew up over there.
Right.
So
then the story that you guys were part of this gang, the Bishops. I mean, were you guys a gang? I mean, were the Bishops, was this a real thing even?
no,
I mean, I don't even think you even knew all of the guys that ended up getting convicted with you, did you?
nah.
The bishops were,
Yeah.
but the bishops were a thing. John Urbina came from Chicago, Illinois, and started the bishops. And yeah, we were teenagers, you know, running the streets, and we weren't going around beating up black people. You know, we hung out and drank, and that's about it. We weren't robbers, we weren't murderers, and many of the people that Louis, for example, I might have hung out with him one time in my whole life. Joseph Rickard one time in my whole life, and the fact that they're saying that we were white supremacists, and the majority of us are Mexican. The guy that started the Bishops was Mexican is ridiculous. Like, we lived in a predominantly black neighborhood. Like, I'm sorry, but you're not going to run around the neighborhood beating up black people and robbing black people. It's just not going to happen.
So the Bishops, you guys would just kind of just go and hang out and drink and I'm guessing chase girls and...
Yeah, that's basically, we hung out at one of the girls' house every day. Rarely ever left the house together. That was what we did. We were teenagers and we drank and smoked marijuana, and we weren't going around robbing and beating people up.
And Louis, I think you had told me kind of a similar story. I mean, who did you know in the group? And I don't think you knew all of them.
No, as far as Mel and Lorenzo went, I didn't really know them two. I knew their aunts and their uncles because they was good friends with my mother and my father, you know. And Eric, well, I never met Eric.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, he might have been in that house, but as far as any recollection of him, yeah, he wasn't somebody that was around me.
Yeah, and Eric had told me a similar story. I think he only knew he had only been over the house a couple of times, and I think he had said he wasn't even in town that weekend. But so this murder happened on August 4th, 1992, and we had talked after the hearing on January 3rd. You know, you actually had an alibi that night, and we actually have a clip about that, and we're going to watch that right now.
I wouldn't be able to tell you where I was at 6 months ago, but I remember the night that Vernon Huggins was killed, because the same night a girl that my mom grew up with named Emma Dawberry, she was killed the same night, and I was sitting at my dad's house when they found her body, and my mom was like, I know that girl, I went to school with her. So that's how I know exactly where I was at that night, and my mom and dad knew where I was at. And even, of course, my lawyers told me the prosecutor is going to, you know, say that your mom and dad would lie for you anyways, so there's no point of even bringing them.
So one of the really interesting things about what you said there is Emma Dawberry, and we know that Emma Dawberry was also murdered on that same night, August 4th, and the person who killed her was Lee Jeffries. And when the Crime Stopper tips were uncovered, when the Wrongful Conviction Project found this, they found a Crime Stopper tip that said that Vernon Huggins was in a bar that night with Lee Jeffries, and that he was later killed because they wanted to keep him quiet about, you know, him killing Emma Dawberry. So when you found out about that, I mean, what did you think about that piece of evidence?
Well, I mean, I thought maybe it would help exonerate me, but like at this point, like we had so many different stories and different versions of different stories of what could happen. I never, I mean, even still to this day, I don't know exactly what happened. I don't know whether it was his girlfriend's family that killed him. Was it Lee Jeffries that killed him? All I know, it wasn't us. And that sucks not knowing that, like, who really had something to do with it. I think the prosecutors know who has something to do with it. I think they still have more information that we're not aware of, and I want to know who really did it. I think whoever really did it should be prosecuted.
Yeah, because, right, I mean, there's no justice for the victim at this point because, you know, they're still looking at you guys and you didn't have anything to do with it. That means the real killer is out there. And, you know, so the Wrongful Conviction Project had got involved with Eric, I think like 10 or 11 years ago, and they repeatedly were trying to get public records from the police department, and eventually this started to trickle out, and ultimately it ended up being, I think, hundreds of pages of evidence that not only, you know, your defense attorneys didn't see, but also the prosecutors. And one of the really interesting things was an interview they did with Vernon Huggins' uncle. And he told police that on that Vernon had, in the day or two before the murder, that he had broken into his girlfriend's house and confronted the girlfriend and the girlfriend's mother. Her family obviously was very upset about this, and they later confronted Vernon on the night of the murder. And one of the family members was holding a table leg, and we know from the autopsy that Vernon Huggins had blunt force injuries, could have been caused by a table leg. And they confronted him, and many years, or let's see, so he then went upstairs and kind of hid out for a while, and then for a couple hours, eventually his uncle says, "You got to get out of here, you can't hang out here." But this was well after the time when the prosecutors said Vernon Huggins was killed and that you guys did that. Right. So this clearly, to me, seems to point to pretty viable suspects. So when you found out about this, and I know you had another story that you were telling me related to this, so what did you think about this story?
I mean, when I first, read it, I had to go over it a couple times because I had to show it to somebody else, like, read this. Am I reading what this is saying? That this man was literally alive, 2-3 hours after they said we did this? Not only alive, but he was on the east side, okay? The east side in Wilson Park, that's a distance.
Yeah, and none of it makes sense. None of it makes sense. And there is also DNA that was later discovered on a bottle that was next to Vernon Huggins, correct?
And one shoe print.
And one shoe print. I didn't know about that. What's the shoe print?
No, they had one shoe print. Because when they arrested me, they took my shoes and then brought them back.
So they were trying to match up that shoe print to your shoes.
So there's only one shoe print too. So.
And I'm guessing you probably said, go ahead and try.
They brought my shoes back, so I knew they didn't match.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so when you look at that story, to me, again, I have no idea who killed Vernon Huggins, but to me, when you hear that story, that certainly seems like those are pretty viable suspects. I mean, that makes sense. That you got motive, you got a witness saying that they were there, they were carrying something that could have been a murder weapon. I don't know. I mean,
a jury that doesn't know about how the justice system works, once they get their eyes set on somebody, they go after you, and it doesn't matter. And most people on a jury, they're going to believe a prosecutor, a detective, when they say something. The detectives can adjust the timeline of when a murder happened, like they did in my case. They can even have the forensics experts You know, they're buddies with them guys. Say, hey, you know, instead of saying it happened at 1:30 a.m., say it happened at 12:30 a.m., you know, to make timelines match up. They knew we didn't have anything to do with it, this crime. There's no doubt in my mind that they knew we didn't have, but according to them, we were, you know, the bishops, gang members running around doing all these crazy things that they accused us of doing, and they were getting people off the streets, and they had people lying because they were accused of the crime originally. So they lied and turned around and said it was us. At first, we weren't even any suspects. They had they had many other suspects, but two of them said it wasn't us, it was these guys. Now, these two guys that accused us of committing this crime are now, one serving a life sentence in Texas for a murder, and another one might as well be serving life. He's been in and out of prison his whole life, probably almost did as much time as we did.
Wow.
And it's just, I mean, I know for a fact that if all this evidence, which coincidentally all turned up after we had mostly all been out of prison, instead of 11 years ago when we first started asking for this stuff, we would have been out. First, we would have never got convicted in the first place. Second, we should have been out 11 years ago when we first started asking for this evidence. Now, all of a sudden, it shows up. It was there the whole time, but
Right.
now all of a sudden you decide you're going to go find it for us.
So Tim Sweeney, was he your attorney and your brother's attorney, or just your brother's?
He was just my brother's attorney.
Okay, so I actually talked to Tim Sweeney after the hearing on January 3rd, and we actually have a clip of him talking.
I think there's something in the law requiring full disclosure of evidence and knowing what the evidence is and what's been done by the police in any kind of criminal investigation. And I think what happened here is the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. And so my guy, who was a teenager at the time this all started, ended up being faced with horrific charges. You know, these would have been capital offenses if they hadn't been kids. You know, that's how horrific these charges were. And they were facing these, you know, the burden of what they were looking at without the evidence that the state had in its possession.
And that's interesting what he said there. Now, Louis, you actually went to trial, is that right? It was after Eric Mish's trial, correct?
No, it was me and CJ was the first two to go trial.
Okay,
We went in June, Eric went in December.
okay. So you go through this trial, you're hearing people, you know, testify against you, and you're saying this obviously isn't true, this is complete ridiculous. What did you feel when the jury comes back and they're like, guilty, and you're facing life in prison at that point?
I mean, I was numb. I didn't know what to feel. I couldn't feel, you know? Unless you standing there in that moment, you can't, there ain't no words to even describe it, you know? I looked back at the people that were there, you know, I went back to my cell.
Did you even think that was possible when you're going through this and you're hearing people, you know, lying, and you're like, you just know that you weren't there? I mean, did you think it was possible that it was going to end up like it did?
No, I still had hope during my trial. You know, I believed in my attorney, and, you know, like he said, they didn't prove nothing, so we're not going to call you as a witness for this or anybody else. So I trusted him, and, you know, it turned out like this.
And, you know, a lot of people, when I cover stories like this, you know, they say, well, why didn't the guy testify? If he thinks he's so innocent, why wouldn't he just get up there and testify? And, you know, defense attorneys that I talk to, they're like, well, why should he testify? They didn't prove anything. And I'm thinking that's probably what your defense team was thinking. There was no need for you to testify.
Yeah. I mean, that was the way they explained it to me.
Yeah.
You know, and being 20 years old, I don't know what I would have, you know, because I know how they would have, you know, probably tried to attack me. And, you know, I wasn't no angel. I had some misdemeanors and stuff in domestic court, but I ain't never had no felonies.
Yeah.
You know.
And Lorenzo, your case was really interesting because you and your brother, you had seen Eric and Joseph Ricard and Louis Castilla get convicted before you, and you guys had to say, okay, do I take this to trial or do I take like an Alford plea? So what's going through your head? And ultimately, you took the Alford plea. So talk about that and why you decided to do that.
Well, what was previously stated was the reason I took a plea bargain was because I saw my co-defendants get convicted, and that's far from the truth. I was innocent, and the whole time I was like, I'm not taking a plea bargain for something I didn't do, but they used me and my brother against each other. They basically said, well, first of all, they charged me and my brother for a capital murder charge, which we were juveniles at the time, so we weren't even supposed to be eligible for the death penalty. So then they dropped the death penalty, but they still kept our case as a capital murder charge, which means if you're convicted at trial, the jury could choose to add extra time to your sentence. So we were facing the most time out of any, and by this point we had already been through three different lawyers, me and my brother apiece. I started out with the juvenile lawyer. I started off with the original lawyer that I retained. He ended up passing away. I got another lawyer. They made me get rid of him because he wasn't capital qualified, which, like I said, if I wouldn't have ever been charged with a capital case, I could have had that lawyer who I liked. They gave me these public defenders that weren't doing their job, and I kept on telling them, like, when I went to court, I didn't feel like they were doing their job. They kept asking for continuance after continuance. Finally, the judge is like, I'm not giving you any more continuances. So my lawyer basically set up a meeting with my family and me and my brother in the county jail, and basically said they need to take plea bargains. If not, they're going to get 70-something years in life in prison. And I was like, well, let's go. I'm innocent. My brother was scared, you know. And when we went to court, it was our last time to take a plea bargain. They asked my brother if he accepted a plea, an Alford plea, which at the time we thought was an innocent. We were basically pleading innocent, but we found out later that we were pleading guilty, but without saying we were guilty, which doesn't make sense to me. You're pleading guilty without saying you're guilty. But basically, my brother wanted to take the plea. I told him I'm not taking it. They wouldn't let my brother take it because I wasn't accepting it. So they gave me and my brother a 24-hour recess. They sent us back to the county jail. The next day, we're on our way to court, and my brother was mad at me. You know, he was like, "We're going to get more time," and you know, he's blaming me, misplacing his blame. But I mean, I understand, and so I decided I was going to take a plea bargain for him. I said, I'm going to take it for you. My lawyers were telling us they were going to get us back in court on appeal, and when they're better prepared. And so I went in and took the plea, and they asked my brother if he set the plea to 15 to life, and he said, yeah. They asked him why. He said because he was in fear of a greater sentence if convicted at trial. They asked me if I set the plea to 15 to life, and I said, I told them no. I said yeah, and they said why? I said because I don't want my brother to get more time. So the judge ordered the stenographer, please strike that statement from the record. So then said, Mr. Wingate, please address your client. So they told me to tell him I'm in fear of a greater sentence. So they accepted my plea. And if that isn't an example of coercion, I don't know what else is, you know. Yeah. And another thing I want to say too is, like, one of the guys that was testifying against us, he gave why you say that Eric gave a confession. This guy gave the exact same statement, almost identical, that Eric did, because all Eric did was repeat this other guy's statement. And they didn't charge the other guy for a crime, but they charged Eric. Why? Because the other guy was willing to testify. Eric wasn't willing to testify, but yet they said they never offered the first guy a plea. It makes no sense.
Louis, we're going to be wrapping up here. Is there anything else you want to tell people? Anything else you want to say that we didn't touch on?
We basically touched on things that I wanted to talk about. I mean, this whole cloud over my head that they're trying to still hold over me, it's ridiculous. You know, it's wasting people's money. Yeah. You know, They know what they got to do. They got it all right there. They got good detectives here probably. Give them all the case. Let them see what they got to say. You know?
Yeah.
They got this victim's integrity unit.
Yeah, have them look at it.
Let's give some integrity to the victim. Vernon Huggins needs answers. His family needs answers. Let's give it to him.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Thanks both of you guys, and thanks for joining us for Case Files. You can look at our extensive coverage on this case at WTUL.com and on our YouTube channel. And just a reminder that you can see a new episode of Case Files every Friday on WTUL 11+. If you want us to talk about a case or a story we previously covered, or have a question, reach out to us at 11 Investigates at WTUL.com. I'm Brian Duggar with 11 Investigates. See you next week.